denke, das ist okay. Dann sieht man nicht, dass du irgendwann abliest oder so.
Genau.
Ja, ich weiß.
Herzlich willkommen zum 20. Brandschutz-Screening am Tag der Bücherverbrennung. Wegen den Bestimmungen zur Corona-Pandemie können wir leider nicht, wie in liebgewonnener Tradition, zur Versammlung drüben an der Totaltankstelle aufrufen. Also wird heute mal das Brandschutz-Symposium als Livestream hier stattfinden. Seit dem Jahr 2000 projiziert der österreichische Künstler und Architekt Hans Levidahl immer am 10. Mai aktuelle internationale Brandschutzfilme an die Fassaden der Deutschen Nationalbibliothek. Das heißt abwechselnd in Frankfurt oder in Leipzig. Bis 2033 wird er diese Aktion fortsetzen. Niemand hätte am Anfang vermutet, dass die Brisanz und Notwendigkeit eher noch zu als abnimmt. Heute wird Hans Levidahl die Brandschutzfilme aus China kommentieren. Und anschließend der Medienwissenschaftler Chris Heppel-Spray aus Kalifornien mit dem Vortrag Virus is a Language zuschalten. Und wie immer alle Beteiligten und natürlich die Technik-Crew von der Firma Two Cents. Viel Spaß.
Okay. Da würde ich sagen, jeden. Ja.
So jetzt.
Hallo, ich begrüße alle zu dieser Brandschutzaktion. Leider haben wir in Frankfurt im Moment keinen Ton. Es war aber von Haus aus geplant, dass ich irgendwann. Ich begrüße alle zu dieser Brandschutzaktion. Leider haben wir in Frankfurt im Moment keinen Ton. Es war aber von Haus aus geplant, dass ich irgendwann. Ich begrüße alle zu dieser Brandschutzaktion. Leider haben wir in Frankfurt im Moment keinen Ton. Das war aber von Haus aus geplant. Das ist okay, ich begrüße alle zu dieser Brandschutzaktion. Im Moment keinen Ton. Das war aber von Haus aus geplant. Ja, ich begrüße alle recht herzlich. Ich war ein bisschen irritiert durch die Zeitversetzung und das Feedback, das wir hier haben. Wie gesagt, ich danke noch einmal der Firma TwoCent für diese wunderbare Projektion auf die DNB und beginne jetzt halt einfach mit meinem Vortrag allmählich. Ich danke noch allen Mitarbeitern recht herzlich und ab mit Groß. Jetzt habe ich irgendwie keine Nebengeräusche, das ist fein.
So, von dir.
Ja.
So. Willst du es auf Zoom gehen?
Ja, schalte ein das Keynote. Ja. Wie gesagt, das Motto zu dem Ganzen ist die glückliche Brandschutzfamilie. Hier auf Japanisch sagt es die glückliche Brandschutzfamilie. Ich gebe zu, auf Japanisch ist kein Unterschied zwischen Brandschutz und Katastrophenschutz. Und da begrüße ich Sie dieses Jahr wieder. Wobei zu Anfang meines Pressetextes habe ich kurz auf die emotionale Pest von Wilhelm Reich verwiesen und gesagt, man muss mit der Behandlung dieser emotionalen Pest weiterfahren. Dazu ist vielleicht zu sagen, dass der Begriff doch ziemlich zweischneidig ist, wie ich bei genauer Recherche festgestellt habe, weil Wilhelm Reich gegen Ende seines Lebens den Begriff geprägt hat für Kritik, die sich gegen ihn, der ja eigentlich die Situation verbessern will, richtet. Dazu ist irgendwie zu sagen, dass mir der Begriff aber trotzdem dann recht gut gefallen hat, weil so wie ich ihn ursprünglich missverstanden habe, eigentlich habe ich das nur so verstanden, dass halt von der Charakteranalyse her die charakterliche Panzerung dann dazu führt, dass die emotionale Pest, grob verkürzt gesagt der Faschismus, sich halt pandemisch verbreitet. Wilhelm Reich ist mir hier auch an anderer Stelle noch ein typisches Beispiel, weil der es geschafft hat, dass zu seiner Lebenszeit seine Bücher zweimal verbrannt wurden. Einmal 1933 von den Nationalsozialisten und einmal von der FDA, praktisch von der US-Regierung, von der Federal Drug Administration heißt das, glaube ich. Jetzt, warum hier der Trump Tower? Weil ich irgendwie doch diesmal die Ereignisse in China zum Anlass genommen habe, über Überwachungstechnologien zu sprechen und darum auch dann Chris eingeladen habe, der als Cyborg-Spezialist extra über Überwachungstechnologien und über neue Technologien und ihren Missbrauch für soziale Kontrolle sprechen wird. Vielleicht kurz nur der Ausgangspunkt, ein Leckerbissen für Verschwörungstheoretiker. Wenn man sich diesen Link, der hier angezeigt wird, herunterlädt, dann kommt man auf auf ein PDF, das zwei chinesische Wissenschaftler zur offiziellen chinesischen Version verfasst haben. Die Chinesen haben das dann sehr schnell zensuriert und vom Netz genommen, die da sagen, dass das Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention in unmittelbarer Nähe dieses Fischmarktes ist, an dem übrigens keine Fledermäuse verkauft werden, und die ersten Kranken in dem Krankenhaus, das Sie ganz unten im Bild im Union Hospital aufgetreten sind. Jetzt wie auch immer das gewesen ist, eines ist gewiss, Mike Pompeo und in der Folge auch Donald Trump nehmen eigentlich immer auf dieses Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention Bezug. In der Presse ist immer die Rede vom Institut für Virologie in Wuhan, die dort ein Labor Sicherheitsstufe 4 haben und die von der Disease Control haben nur ein Labor der Sicherheitsstufe 2. Trump sagt einfach ziemlich zweideutig nur, dass er Beweise, gut, da kann man auch sehen, was sind Beweise, dafür hat, dass es sich hier um einen Laborunfall handelt. Und wenn dem Wuhan Center for Disease Control and Prevention eine Fledermaus ausbüchst, das ist der einzige Ort in Wuhan, an dem Fledermäuse in Käfigen gehalten werden, dann ist das ein Laborunfall. Warum die ganze Presse dann ein seltsames Lügenkonstrukt auf dieser Meldung von Trump aufbaut, ist mir nicht ganz klar. Für mich ist es aber eher sekundär. Mir geht es eher darum, einerseits, dass in einer Diktatur wie China, wenn so eine Seuche auftritt, sofort alles verschwiegen wird. So ist der Li Wenliang, ein Arzt, der 600 Meter weg von diesem Institut wohnt, gemaßregelt worden mit 8 anderen Personen am 1. Februar, glaube ich, dass er seine unrichtigen Behauptungen einstellen soll. Irgendwann hat sich die Regierung nachher bei ihm entschuldigt, aber es ist halt so ein typisches Vorgehen. Lustig in dem Zusammenhang, und dann höre ich schon auf mit der Covid-Erkrankung, ist, dass auf der Seite der chinesischen Botschaft in Deutschland berichtet wird, dass, glaube ich, am 27. Dezember der Direktor der Abteilung für Atemwegserkrankung des Hubei-Krankenhauses, das ist, glaube ich, dort, wo dieser Arzt arbeitet, eben diesem Center for Disease Control and Prevention des Bezirks Yang'an, das ist dort, wo sie die Fledermäuse halten, mitgeteilt hat, dass das aufgetreten ist. Das steht da so unschuldig auf dieser Seite, aber in Wirklichkeit, warum hat er das denen gemeldet? Er wird einfach gesagt haben, liebe Leute, euch ist da was passiert. Als ich das letzte Mal China in den Mittelpunkt stellen wollte, habe ich das primär auf die Ereignisse am Tiananmen-Platz gerichtet, mein Interesse. Hier sieht man, wie Studenten eine Zeitung verbrennen, die offenbar Lügen über sie verbreitet hat. Ist für mich auch insofern interessant, als mich immer so zweischneidige Dinge interessieren. Wie gesagt, Bücher werden fast jeden Tag und überall verbrannt. Die Studenten haben dann vis-à-vis vom Mao Zedong auf diesem Platz des himmlischen Friedens die Göttin der Demokratie, oder ich würde lieber von der Göttin der Freiheit sprechen, errichtet. Hier sieht man, wie das Monument umgestürzt wurde. Lustig in dem Zusammenhang, ich schreibe es im Pressetext, ist, dass hier immer von den Ereignissen des 4. Juni des 35. Mai berichtet wird. Und zwar deshalb, um die Zensurbots auszutricksen, weil der Zwischenfall vom 4. Juni automatisch vom Netz genommen würde, jeder Bericht. Hier der berühmte Tankman, eine Person, die sich vor die Kolonne der Panzer gestellt hat. Ich habe dann als Ausgangspunkt damals vor 3 Jahren genommen, da war gerade der Volkskongress und weil die Regierung befürchtete, dass es zu Selbstverbrennungen kommen könnte am Platz des himmlischen Friedens, haben sie mobile Brandschutzteams errichtet, die sofort Leute, die sich verbrennen würden, löschen. Hier ein besonderer Leckerbissen. Irgendein Tourist hat gefilmt, wie die Feuerwehr in einer Übung eine Person, dargestellt durch Pappkartons, die im Begriff ist, sich selbst zu verbrennen, löschen könnte oder möchte. Ist offensichtlich mit einem Handy gefilmt. Die Person kam offenbar zufällig vorbei bei dieser Übung. Das ist aber im weiteren Sinne auch ein Brandschutzfilm. Ja, hier ein Bild, das kommt, wenn irgendein Zugang blockiert wird, also das Netz ist voller Zensurmaßnahmen. Insofern für China interessant, dass, das habe ich schon zuerst gesagt, lustigerweise ausnahmsweise Donald Trump hier eher bei der Wahrheit bleibt und China die Lügen verbreitet. Interessant ist, dass im Außenverhältnis andere Lügen erzählt werden als im Innenverhältnis. Also für die chinesische Bevölkerung wird gesagt, das Virus sei von den Amerikanern nach China eingeschleppt worden. Im Außenverhältnis bleibt man bei einer offiziellen Version, von der man ja auch nicht weiß, ob sie wahr ist oder nicht. In dem Zusammenhang nur interessant, dass zum Beispiel ein Brief der EU-Außenminister zensiert wurde, weil da drinnen steht, dass der Ausbruch in China begonnen hat. Kurz zu diesem Ausbruch noch gesagt, ist vielleicht auch nicht so uninteressant. Nachdem vor 3 Jahren die SARS-Epidemie war, hat man in Wuhan begonnen, über Fledermäuse zu forschen, diese Fledermäuse aus dieser Höhle in Yunnan herauszuholen, in Käfige zu sperren. Hätte man diese Fledermäuse einfach in ihrer Höhle gelassen, wäre der zweite Ausbruch sicher nicht zustande gekommen. Wie das jetzt sich wirklich verhalten hat, ist fraglich, aber eins ist gewiss, wenn im Zentrum der Corona-Forschung eine Corona-Pandemie ausbricht, dann wird das schon kein Zufall sein. Hier ein anderes Bild, und zwar von Katar, also wenn in Katar was zensuriert wird, sehen Sie dieses Bild. Hier euphemistisch nennt China diese Lager Berufsbildungszentren, sind also hier werden die Uiguren berufsgebildet. Ja, und rein allgemein gesprochen ist es so, dass mich mit dieser Brandschutzaktion immer mehr so medientheoretische Überlegungen interessiert haben. Also auf einem Symposium, kann ich mich erinnern, hat der Herr Magun berichtet, wie im Internet irgendwelche Zensurmaßnahmen gesetzt wurden und der Buchforscher Lokatis hat gesagt, ja, aber das war ja immer schon da und das war bei der Einführung des Buchdrucks genau dasselbe und das ist die eine Seite, dass halt mit Einführung jedes Mediums immer dieselben Mechanismen ablaufen. Das andere Ding ist aber schon das, dass mit der Einführung dieser elektromagnetischen Medien oder vereinfacht gesagt der digitalen Medien irgendwie die Geräte, mit denen kommuniziert wird, also die Telefone zum Beispiel, zu Geräten der Überwachung, der sozialen Überwachung werden können. Und das ist meiner Meinung nach schon qualitativ ein neuer Schritt, weil mit Büchern ist das nicht so leicht zu machen. Sodass mich an der Sache interessiert, wie zwar einerseits immer wieder das Gleiche kommt, wenn hier der Mephistopheles zum Beispiel sagt, da ist für mich nichts Neues zu erfahren, das kenne ich schon seit 100.000 Jahren, es andererseits aber doch so ist, dass eine Evolution der Kontrolle und Überwachung stattfindet. Das ist auch, warum ich Chris Hebel-Gray eingeladen habe, weil er als Cyborg-Spezialist natürlich da genaueres berichten kann als ich. Es ist aber ganz offensichtlich, dass dass es in die Richtung geht, dass irgendwann ein Interface zwischen Gehirn und Netz, Medium hergestellt werden wird, was zu einer ungeahnten Vernetzung der Individuen führt. Und die Gefahren der Kontrolle sind hier auf jeden Fall gegeben. Danke. Ich bitte jetzt die Eva Ursprung, kurz den Chris einzuführen und den Chris dann mit seinem Vortrag zu beginnen.
Hello. I would like to welcome now Chris Gray from California. He's sitting at home now, and he is an expert in mind control, with the new means of neuroscience, like optogenetics and very, very new forms that we don't know much about yet. Chris Gray, he is professor, he's lecturer at the University of California in Santa Cruz, and also author of the books Cyborg Citizens and Post-Modern War. So I'm very curious about your statement now. Thank you for being here.
Can you turn on the screen share? I cannot share my screen. You have to enable me to share the screen.
Okay. Bildschirm teilen. I think you are on the stream now.
I am streaming, but I cannot put my desktop up to show my images. You have to enable, Christoph has to turn on share screen. It's disabled because you're the host of the Zoom meeting.
Okay.
The Zoom host, but enable me to share my screen, or you only see me the whole time.
Ich schaue gerade. Das weiß ich nicht.
It still says host
But
disabled.
it's your turn now.
Yeah.
It's your turn now, Chris.
So da.
You must turn on so I can show my desktop. Otherwise, it'll just be an image of me. The desktop, you have disabled screen sharing. You have as the host, you have the ability to let me show the screen.
I don't know where it is.
I'm just the one who's talking. Christoph is the technician and he's working on it. Maybe we simply talk a little bit while he keeps looking for the right options.
So, ja, okay. Ich glaube,
Oh, wait. I
think that's it, huh?
We didn't see.
Let's see.
Bildschirm freigeben.
Yes, I have to enable it.
Okay.
Yes?
Mhm.
Good. Then please
Is
try.
it coming up? So let's just top one. That's for recording.
Okay, we
that's
seem to have
good.
technical problems because we still cannot see his desktop. We have to get his desktop on YouTube. Now we have this here.
Mm-hmm.
Ah, now we got it. See,
Yeah. Yes.
it's here. Chris, you can talk.
Okay, yes, I can talk, but I still don't know how to get my screen to come
You
up.
have my desktop now here. How is this possible? No. Das kann nicht sein.
No, it does not tell me anything.
Mm-hmm. This is not a good idea.
Oh yes, there you go. Okay, now it's up.
Christo, schaust du am Livestream?
Okay,
Was ist das?
it should be
Sunscreen
coming
is
up in a
just
second.
Eva,
I
das ist
can
der
start talking
Sunscreen.
now. Oh. You guys might want to mute.
Yes.
Oh, okay, up here in the little window. That's nice. Ah. So soon, sorry for the technical problems, but this is all new to us. Very soon, the images will start to come up in a systematic way, as now we see. So, can't see everything. It's a great honor for me to take part in this project again. In 2014, I spoke in Frankfurt for one of these projections. As the introduction so nicely said, I study science and technology. I especially look at thought control, the flow of information through systems. There might be time to have questions at the end of this. Okay, now how do I go forward? There we go. What I'm going to talk about now is virus as a language. And of course, our main focus is viral ideas. The central issue of Hans Neverdal's project is to look at book burning and other ways of controlling society through thought control. Of course, there's been book burning throughout history. It's not always easy. There's a great book called Books Burn Badly by Manuel Rivas. Talks about the burning of the books by the Falange in La Coruña when the Franco's coup began. Of course, burning books leads to burning bodies. My talk in 2014 was about burning books, burning bodies, burning minds. I'm going to talk about a lot of this, but not so much burning minds in the technical way I spoke about before. Then I was looking a lot at the neurosciences and how mind control can actually come about technologically through direct interventions of the brain. But actually today we're going to talk more about how society is shaped by the ways people try to control thought. Book burning is one symptom of the virus of authoritarianism. Body burning is another. Here you see, although I don't see in the feed that this is coming up, but what I'm putting up on my computer, what I see, is an image of the announcement for the 2014 talk. Which is, those of you who don't speak German, just to reprise what Hans has been doing since the year 2000, he's been projecting on the Frankfurt Library and the one in Leipzig images that discuss in different ways the Nazi book burnings, which started May 10th, 1933. So for 2033 is when this will end. 30 years he's pursuing this project. So I was in Frankfurt in 2014, because obviously such travel is not happening. So we're doing this mediated through digital technology. And we're doing this because of a virus, COVID-19 or SARS-CoV-2 or coronavirus, whatever you want to call it. That's the reason we cannot participate in a more embodied way. Clearly, we need to think more about viruses. And to do this, I want to talk about viruses as a language. Now, this is a heuristic. It's a tool for thinking through the implications of current era we are involved in. One thing you will notice is I do not talk about memes as the analog to genes that the scientist Dawkins proposed, because I don't think it's a good analogy. I think it's dangerous because it's too much like the word and the way the idea is imposed. It's too much like genes. The way memes, cat memes and little images that spread through the internet, they took their name from Dawkins' idea, but his idea is actually much more complicated. If you can see my desktop, which according to my other computer, you probably can't, I have images of Susan Jane Blackmore, one of the main people who articulated Dawkins' view of the meme, and I have a little chart that argues genes and memes function the same way, which of course they don't. In any sense, they don't function the same way. So it's just a dangerous idea to think that they are the same. But what is important is to notice, whether you believe in the meme system, that viral ideas, viruses in computers and virus in biology, they all work the same way, by spreading information, by getting informational content to be passed on biologically or culturally or in computer systems, one to another. Actually, we see on my little computer, my images are coming up way behind my top. So let's hope that that's just a delay and I'm actually on time. Here you see an image of a virus, an actual biological virus injecting its information into a cell so it can take over that cell. There's 3 different viruses here, the last of these being COVID-19. It's not just that it's infection through information, it is infection as information. Of course, the impetus for starting this project from Hans was looking at fascism. Fascism is a virus, an emotional pandemic, as he likes to call it. And at the top of this screen, there's images of Mussolini, of an American fascist, with a quote from Sinclair Lewis, fascism will come covered with an American flag and carrying a cross, a Nazi spider taking over Germany. It's a Russian illustration. But at the bottom, I put in trends about the spread of democracy, because it isn't just bad things that spread in a viral way, culturally. It is also good things. You can see that democracy suffered a major downturn during World War II in the chart on the left, and you can see on the right that democracy has been doing very well up until 2010. In the last 10 years, we know this line, the blue line, has gone down. There are now fewer democracies than there were 10 years ago. But there are still many more democracies than there were in 1970. So it all depends on what's happening currently. There's nothing that says that progress has to be good. Things change, there is progression, but democracies can go up as the ideas spread, and then other ideas can spread. One of the ideas that spreads is technologies. Now, while much of what shapes human culture is part of non-human nature, a lot of what shapes human culture comes out of human culture itself. This is especially true of technological change. Here in this chart, looking at consumption dynamics, you can see different technologies and how fast they spread. Now, something to really notice here is the rate of the spread of technologies is accelerating. The rate of technological development is accelerating. The number of scientists and engineers alive right now is greater than it's ever been before. For all of history compared to now, we had less science and technology. Culture, it's important to understand that genetic engineering totally depends on viruses. This is how people get genetically modified with genetic engineering. And we can imagine certain diseases will be cured. Maybe people will be made even better on some scale. Not that there's not a lot of danger about this, but the ability of humans to infect themselves with new genetic information is a major accelerator of biological changes. And viruses are how this is done as the vectors. And if you're a parasitic wasp, viruses are crucial for the parasitic wasp life cycle. And even more important, and something that does impact humans, the whole carbon cycle in the oceans depends on viruses. The oceans would not sequester nearly as much carbon as they do now without the role of these special kinds of viruses. They're called some kind of phage that plays an intermediary role as the ferrogen horse hypothesis argues, which has been confirmed by later studies. So viruses are natural. I should make a comment here about the term natural. So those of you who know my work know that in the last 10 years, I've tried to not use the distinction of culture and nature, because it's all natural. To say that culture is separate from nature is not to take evolution seriously. It's not to take our animality seriously. So humans are natural, our emotions are natural, our works are natural, culture is natural. So if we're going to look at the pandemic, the emotional pandemic we're experiencing now, it's important to focus in on emotions. So the emotions, which of course, obviously, are natural, whether they're in a dog or in ourselves, are interconnected with culture in very important ways, and especially with power. My thinking of this has been very much influenced by my friend Megan Bowler's work on emotions. This is an image of her book, Feeling Power. The emotion we're going to start with, and try to explore these themes, is fear. So, fear provokes many responses. We are living through these responses. You really should check out this video. Chris Mann sings Hello by Adele. It totally captures at least my experience. I was going to play it, but I don't think there's time, and it's unclear how these things are working. So I'm not going to go ahead and play it. But we have people trying to enjoy the pandemic with their little baby, making funny little memes. We see people out on the streets in many parts of the world, social distancing. We, of course, have many cute cat memes in the limited sense of the meme and so on. But behind all of this, of course, is the reality of fear. And there's real reasons to have fear. People are dying. People are very sick. People are being buried in mass graves. So what do we do with this fear? What happens with this fear? Fear is important, too, because it seems to be the driving emotion for a lot of people's politics, especially on the right. You could argue that the so-called left, and I don't really like the left-right distinction, but it's what we work with, the left is motivated by hope and to some extent anger. The right is motivated by fear and to some extent anger. It's quite a different dynamic. Now, when people get fearful and angry, they look for explanations that satisfy their worldview, that fit in with their context. This is where we get conspiracies. Now, many conspiracies are true. Nazism was a conspiracy, and it's true. I'm an anarchist feminist revolutionary. I'm part of a worldwide conspiracy to have an anti-authoritarian, just and sustainable society. So it's not as if all conspiracies are wrong, and it's very annoying that many people just denounce conspiracies as if every argument that humans working together, sometimes in secret, it doesn't happen. It's just nonsense. But these conspiracies here do happen. Conspiracy, by the way, comes from conspire, the Latin, which means to breathe together, right? People burn books together, they tell lies together, they burn people together, they also have hope together, make revolutions together, whatever. You see a conspiracy the Chinese have been pushing, that the US started the virus. You see a lot of people think that the new upgrade of the world's wireless systems is part of a conspiracy, Bill Gates and so on. The lockdown is a hoax. Trump administration is pushing the argument that the virus was built in a lab in Wuhan. We know for a fact the virus was not built, it's not engineered in a lab. That doesn't mean it didn't come from the lab. I'll talk about that in a second. But the evidence is clear. If you look at the DNA, it was not engineered according to the scientists, more than one, and I've heard no disagreement with that. Now, when you ever look at anything really important in terms of history or the present, you have to differentiate causes versus occasions. The pandemic is an occasion. The fundamental causes are different. Fundamental causes existed before the pandemic and will exist after this pandemic. Now, we happen to know a lot about the origins of this pandemic because of the incredible surveillance society China has. And I know Hans alluded to it and the history with Tiananmen Square, the authoritarian communism of China. I didn't see any slides. I do not speak German. So I don't know if you talked about the Sesame credit system. You see here several illustrations of a key part of the current Chinese surveillance system, where every citizen in China gets a social credit score based on whether they criticize the government, how much they show up at work, how many taxes they pay, if they say nice things about the government online, and what their friends do, the scores of their friends. And if your social credit score falls down, becomes lower, then you're not given access to goods in society. You cannot make reservations on holidays to ride the trains, and you're surveilled more, and it becomes onerous. A lot of this work was pioneered in the oversight of the Tibetan, the conquered Tibetan people, and of the Muslim minority in the west of China. Those people having their DNA collected, facial recognition done, as well as massive files are kept on everyone to chart just how exactly loyal they are. But this has actually given China a leg up on controlling their society with this pandemic kit. This is only one of the two main reasons we can argue that China managed to limit their epidemic, was the massive surveillance state that allowed contact tracing, and unrelated to that, the fact that people are quite used to using masks when they're infectious, and use of masks clearly makes a difference. So what's the most likely source of this infection? Well, as most of the experts have argued, it's the wet market. You can look at this great Chinese data that shows that most of the early cases chronicled were in fact linked to the wet market. Some were not, but that in a way is definitive. We can see in the corner, there's a great chart showing the whole system that takes viruses from the wild and introduces them into domestic animals and other creatures that have close contact with humans, and then humans get the virus and it becomes infectious. This happens with influenza viruses, it happens with SARS and MERS, and it seems to have happened with this in this case, including this little armadillo-like creature, the pangolin, might have been one of the vectors or a bat, perhaps, to put COVID-19 into the human population. But really, it's not the only explanation. Although the Trump administration and wacko conspiracy theorists argue that the virus was manufactured, and that would include the Chinese who claimed that the US manufactured the virus, we could look at the DNA and see why it wasn't manufactured. That doesn't mean that the virus didn't escape from a lab. This article in Newsweek, written by a former editor of Science magazine, so it has real bona fides, goes into great detail showing that it's not at all impossible that the Wuhan lab, which we know was studying viruses exactly of this type, that the lab accident or mistake allowed the virus to enter into the population of Wuhan, which seems to me, almost as likely as it came out of the wet market. We know that scientists from the Wuhan lab were going into the bat caves where the SARS virus originated and sticking probes up the assholes, the anuses of bats, and taking that material back to their lab to experiment on it. Now, this was part of a whole network of experiments that were done and are being done to try to get ahead of the next pandemic. The trouble is that viruses in labs escape. Biological vectors escape from labs. Labs are human technical systems, and they always have errors. And the other problem is that one of the ways scientists explore these viruses to try to prepare for the pandemic is something called gain-of-function research, which means they try to see if the virus can easily move into other animal vectors. It's called animal passage, and this would be animals where it could easily spread. They were doing this research on viruses very much like this type. And it's very possible that while doing this research, or afterwards, or even before, the virus escaped into Wuhan, and that's where the epidemic started. As many experts argue, it's even more likely it came out of the wet market, because there the security, biological security protocols are much less. Still, this kind of research, many of us have felt for a long time, is dangerous. For at least a decade, it's been a major debate among scientists. And we see here a 2014 article from Nature Reviews Microbiology, where a number of scientists are saying that this is the wrong approach. Now, you have to remember, the Wuhan lab is part of a worldwide network of labs doing this research. Now, some US money went to that lab to do research, but there are labs in Europe and in the United States doing the same research. And money from outside those countries goes to those labs. So in no way is this a China project. This is a worldwide attempt to get ahead of pandemics, and if it backfired and led to the spread of this disease, then that would be ironic, of course, and unfortunate, but it would not be a manifest act of evil, as engineering a virus and releasing it would be. As I've said already, there is no evidence the virus was engineered and released. And no one would engineer and release a virus unless they had a vaccine. So if this was an accident, it could just as easily have been in a US lab with different vectors. The Wuhan lab was studying the origins of SARS virus and these other coronaviruses because that's where they happen to know they come from, right? So this is ironic because this is the subculture many of us trust most in this crisis, and it might be the source of this crisis. What can you do? So who do you blame? Well, you have to blame civilization because it goes further back. It goes to how science is organized. It especially goes to how humans are intervening in wild nature and making it possible for these pathogens that used to just hang out in the asses of bats in caves in China to actually spread to the whole world. And the same with Ebola, and the same with dangerous diseases in South America and North America. This destruction of wild nature, this colonization and utilization of every living creature, the massive spread of humans, now the greatest megafauna in the history of the planet, with almost 8 billion of us, ripe for pandemic. These are all the underlying sources of this disease. The occasion turns out to be China, but the cause is human civilization. You cannot put this just on China, in my opinion. So, wet market or lab mistake, the viral spread is natural, inevitable, and a lot of people have been predicting this for a long time, myself included, this kind of an accident or this kind of a viral contamination from the destruction of nature. But also, I want to stress here that the attempts of governments to control the spread of information is not just in China. Of course, it's in all the other countries as well. They're attempting to control the spread of information. And in the capitalist countries, we have what's called surveillance capitalism, where in many ways the most effective and pernicious and perhaps dangerous collector of massive amounts of information. Something's ringing, but not me. Is in fact capitalism. I really strongly represent Shoshana Zuboff's book. I've reviewed it if you want a quick take on it at the website Technocultura that I'm part of, because it's a crucial balance to understanding what's happening in China through the government. It's happening in the United States and in Europe and much of South America and South Africa and many other countries in Asia, Japan, and so on, through capitalism. The same dynamic of massive control of the flows of information through society. That doesn't flow, just whoever wants it to know something. It's controlled, just as a biological virus spreads through different kinds of actions and in different very specific ways. Information does just as well. Which brings us to politics. Of course, the term politics comes from the Greek polis, which I called the herd. I don't think the Greeks think of it as a herd, but it's a group of people makes political decisions. Now, because of new technologies, all sorts of political opinions, whether they are based on facts or not, spread throughout society. And since people choose, in many respects, what they hope to hear in the capitalist countries, people could perpetuate their own illusions. The facts of what Trump has actually said pale in the face of what Trump supporters wish he had said and done. So we're going to keep seeing social media turbocharging spread of ideas, memes, fake news, lies. Of course, in a country like China, the government's trying to control that spread. But you have to remember, the average Chinese consumer of information knows the government's spreading it, and they are probably at least as suspicious of what they hear as we are suspicious of advertisements that are continually telling us that every company in the United States is only interested in make our lives better. Apparently, they aren't interested in making money at all. Now, to get even more specific, although I'm mainly going to talk about Trump, it's worth noticing that the current crop of nationalist populists have all share the same level of mismanagement of this pandemic. They're very resistant to this outside force that changes their narrative, whether it's Boris Johnson in English, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Orbán in Hungary, Erdogan in Turkey, Duerte in the Philippines, Putin in Russia, even on the left, Maduro in Venezuela, Ortega in Nicaragua, Obrador in Mexico, originally dealt with the virus by claiming it was a plot to stop him from the reforms he feels are needed in Mexico. And of course, these biological viruses are not interested in the viral spread of information, so they don't care Obrador fears. They just want to keep doing what they do. Well, they don't have agency. They just keep doing what they do, which is to spread. Now, it's interesting when you look at these people and how they interact with the public, often going around mass media, they often seem like they're drunk. At least that's my impression. And this image doesn't discount that. Trump in particular seems so much like the kind of drunk you might meet in a bar, bragging about his brilliance and how he's the best of this and the best of that. But the thing is, they are drunk. You look at Trump's behavior, as many of us in America have been forced to follow it closely, when he realized how much power he had as president, he became drunk on that power and addicted to his adulation. So much so that our daily briefings on the virus involve a ritualistic period where all the people there who are presenting information probably have to kiss Trump's ass. Not literally, although we could see that might come to pass. So that's a really important dynamic. And actually, Elias Canetti, in his book, Crowds and Power, he talks about how certain types of crowds seem like the shared hallucinations of alcoholics. And so we could look at their irrationality, the overwhelming, there's quick swings between fear and bravado and so on. But actually, when you start looking closely at Trump, it's more than just being an alcoholic. He is actually a proto-fascist. He gets closer and closer to fascism all the time. Though he doesn't even have the competency of Mussolini, so it's unlikely that he's going to be able to bring a fascist regime into power in the United States. Emotionally and psychologically, his approach to the world is fascist. He has some anger, a sense that he's constantly being misjudged and undervalued, and he has even more fear, especially the fear that it will be revealed just how incompetent he is, that he isn't who he pretends to be. And a very good guide for looking at the psychosexual and psycho-emotional aspects of fascism is Male Fantasies, 2 volumes, analysis of the Freikorps, the precursors to the Nazis in Germany in the 20s and 30s, by Klaus Theowitz. If you start looking closely at that, and we will look at some of that in the next few minutes, you can see how nicely it maps over onto Trump. Now, it's important to remember, as Theowitz argued and as I would argue as well, this psychology, this fear-driven psychology of authoritarian ideology is not limited to the right. It can happen with authoritarians on the left as well. And in Male Fantasies, Theowitz refers to this constantly, even though most of his exact evidence is aimed at understanding the Freikorps and how they led to the Nazis and the particularities of their fears and how those fears have manifested. But just to put this in context, one of the people which in fact Theowitz draws on to think about the mass psychology of fascism is the German psychoanalyst and revolutionary Wilhelm Reich, who was expelled from both the German Communist Party and the also bourgeois International Psychoanalytical Association in the same year. His books were burned by the Nazis and they were burned by the US government, and he died in a US prison. But even he talked about fascism as a pestilence, which is one of the tropes of this kind of thinking, because it's driven by fear of the morass, the swamp, slime, dirt, pestilence, women. These are all linked together in the fascist mindset, in the authoritarian mindset, as dangers that have to be overcome. There are actually dangers within the person as well. It's great that all of these have their own, all of these fears have their own label. Glenophobia, I discovered, was the fear of slime. Gynophobia is, of course, the fear of women, and so on and so forth. But this is what drove the Freikorps. Much more than any hope of a better world was intense disgust and anger and fear at how Germany was in the 20s as the society became more and more unstable. So here's Ernst Jünger, who was a big supporter of the Free Corps and one of the major intellectuals of the early days of Nazism even, although he later had issues with them. He talks here about the morass, the red morass, glimmering morass, pungent morass, miserable morass of the present, seething morass of corruption, filth of profiteering, flood of mire, thick pulp, slime, and government, the slippery slope down into the morass, Marxist wave of mire, a wave of blood excrement. And Colonel von Epp, a Free Corps leader and later a Nazi, an attempt by the slime to gain power, ecclesiastical slime, bourgeois slime, soldier slime. You have to remember the Nazis hated the bourgeoisie as much as communists did. They wanted something new, pure. They had a dream of a Germany that never was. It was going to last 1,000 years, for which, because of their intense fear, which includes a fear of themselves, we are full of blood and excrement. We are come from the dirt. Our bodies are full of slime and produce slime. When you read the hatred these people have, and Male Fantasies, this amazing book is full of these quotes, you can notice that what people fear is their own bodies, their own embodiment, which of course, in particular, is instantiated in the female body. So there's a particular hatred of women. And the only women that can be accepted and honored are mothers and wives, and they're put on a pedestal and they're denatured and separated from the real world. All other women are red women, prostitutes, whores, people who enjoy sex. They want social change. They believe in moral rights for different groups. These are all an intense threat directly to the people who embody fascist or authoritarian psychology. And here's a quote from Friedrich Heinz, who was one of the apologists for Nazism in the 1930s and a supporter, talking about how this pacifistic, perverse slime of degenerate literati poured across the land, profaning and desecrating all the treasures of German culture, all the values of the German soul, and dragging everything healthy and rooted into the dirt. Now, how can something be healthy and rooted and not be in the dirt? See, this is just one of a million examples of how this emotional reaction to the world as it is, and this to the intense fears people feel, like whether it's the loss of power, as in fact the whole class of retired soldiers who were the basis of Nazism was, or the loss of white privilege in the United States, which is the basis of Trump support. It leads to this massive fear, which then throws any kind of logic or rationality to the winds. There are 30% of the American people right now, millions of people who claim Trump has done a wonderful job with the virus, even though the United States has the most deaths and the most infections, and we will have the highest rate per capita, unless Brazil passes us with their own little Trump, in the world. And yet in the face of 80,000 dead Americans, their belief in Trump is unfazed. Just as that Nazi apologist from the 1930s is angry about the German soul being rooted in dirt, as if it should be rooted in something else. But of course, ideas like this and these intense emotions, they turn into actual actions. As we've seen in the United States, with some violence and a tremendous rise in hate crimes against Chinese, for example, as well as a massive collapse of sales of Mexican beer called Corona, which is a fine beer and in no way related to the virus. But fear manifests itself in all sorts of strange actions. We see here militia members at the Michigan legislature where open carry is permitted. And then we saw a few days later, African Americans with guns supporting African American legislators as they go into the legislature. And you should ask yourself, how do you feel about these men with guns? I actually feel very good about the African Americans with guns in this case. Maybe I'm being naive, but somehow I find their motivations quite different than that of these people who are arguing against the lockdown. And of course, the African Americans happen to believe that this virus is real. They are supporting their legislators who are trying to ameliorate the effects of the virus. African Americans and other people, Hispanics and so on, working class people in general with unstable jobs, and the unemployed, they are often the ones who suffer the worst from catastrophes like this. And in fact, the death rate of African Americans is significantly higher than the death rate of white Americans. So that's not an accident. But all this fear and actions can be met with something else. It can be met with bravery. You can only be brave if you're afraid anyway. And we've got lots of reasons to be afraid, and so we have many opportunities to be brave. Here are pictures of doctors and nurses who have died. Now, there's a beautiful song by Alicia Keys, Good Job, which I was going to play during this time, but doesn't seem to make sense right now, but I encourage you to look at it. And it includes also many pictures of brave medical personnel and other people who are exposed to the virus to keep the economy running. But we have to understand that all these things are complicated. And so as fear produces the most horrific thinking that attacks Chinese people on the street and that excuses the most incredible incompetence that manifests in thousands and tens of thousands of dead bodies, it also produces incredible upsurge in individual acts of bravery, in social solidarity, in the birth of community. Thought control doesn't have to just come from outside. Thought control can be self-control. If we can manage our own fears and help our friends manage their fears, we can pursue our dream.
Es ist der Ton überlegt, gell?
Collective self-control is called community, even democracy. So I'm going to get to the end now. I would have loved to play Language is a Virus by Laurie Anderson. Those of you who know her work know that My Virus is a Language is a take on that. It's a great song, very profoundly relevant. What I want to talk now a little bit about is the new normal. There is no normal. There hasn't been a normal in a long time. There hasn't been a new normal. What does that even mean? It's been abnormal probably since the 1500s. With the rate of technological change, no human lives through their lifespan without seeing major changes in how technology impacts their lives and how societies organize socially, and so on and so forth. It's abnormal. If you want, you can call it the new abnormal, but don't call it the new normal. The new normal was a term coined in 1993 when Oklahoma federal building was bombed. And it was supposed to explain how it was now that security had to be implemented. And since in the second worst terrorist attack in American history, all these people were killed in Oklahoma. It was really took hold after 9/11 when people talked about the new normal after 9/11. And now people are talking about after this pandemic runs its course, there will be yet another new normal. But humans have not lived lives that weren't impacted by incredible amounts of change in at least 500 years. Maybe back in the Paleolithic times where humanity existed for hundreds of thousands of years, maybe 2 or 3, as a hunter-gatherer without a great deal of change. Maybe during Neolithic times, 10,000 years ago, when agriculture became dominant form of human survival in many places. And there people might go generations without change. But certainly since modernism started, valorizing the now, which is what modernism means, we have seen a continual cycle of change, relentless change. Here I play off Heraclitus' you can never step in the same river twice. The Greek philosopher said this. So you can never step in the same pile of dog shit twice. But yeah, so there's always been change, and people even back in the golden age of Greek philosophy noticed this. But you have to notice how much it's changed now. The pace of change has been accelerated massively. We cannot ignore that because that's the era we are living in. We have to get used to these continual shocks. All you have to do is look at the number of humans, which is going up in an exponential curve, just as the virus continues to spread throughout the human population of the world at exponential curve. The number of species going extinct, going up in an exponential curve, right? For the last 100 years, the climate has been warming at an incredible pace that hasn't been seen except during the other great extinctions, in the history of the planet of Earth. So we are living in deeply unusual times because humans have taken over most of the biosphere and are remaking it into something that we think we want in the short term, paying no attention to the long term. And that is incredibly dangerous, and that is biological evolution. which of course first was driven by natural selection, then was driven by artificial selection. Just for the last 20,000 years, roughly, humans have been selectively breeding flowers and grains and vegetables and animals to suit our purposes. And now, of course, thanks to viruses and genetic engineering, we can have our own participatory evolution. And cultural evolution is even faster. Of course, it produces things like genetic engineering, but it also spreads new concepts and new ways of organizing society and new fads throughout the whole world at an incredible rate, faster than ever. And only in the last 10, 15 years has the world been unified through digital technology that we can have like this happen. Right? So the world isn't normal. There is no new normal. We won't get back to the 2019 normal ever. And even if the pandemic hadn't happened in 2020, we could look at the 2019 normal and say, what? I mean, in 2016, Trump was elected. Is this some new normal with Trump? No, it's all abnormal, and it's happening faster and faster. So the big question becomes, how do we deal with it? Well, to start with, you have to resist the hunger for perfect answers. It isn't just people on the right who fall prey to conspiracies and wishful thinking. I don't know how many of my friends were convinced that they had had the virus, the coronavirus, in December or January, and were now probably immune because they had a little cough or they had trouble breathing. But a lot of them have been tested now. And we've seen in mass testing on cruise ships and on the little town of Bolinas and a whole district of the Mission and a town in Italy, that in fact, the amount of, and in New York, the spread of resistance to the virus and the spread of the virus itself is what that means, the antibodies, was not nearly as extensive as people thought. If you thought you probably had the virus in December, January, you are in all likelihood wrong, right? So don't just go hungry for easy answers. A lot of my friends here in California kept saying, oh, our lockdown is so horrible. Can't we do what Sweden did? Well, Sweden has a death rate that is twice or 3 times that of Denmark. The Swedish experiment still may turn out not to be any worse than the Danish the lockdown approach, which is what California has pursued. But there's really no evidence that it's a giant success, and people cannot buy into that. What you need is to draw on a lot of different sources of information and trust none of them completely. This is called heteroglossia in academia, after the Russian writer Bakhtin's term, or you could call it an open epistemology. You can call it toolbox approach pragmatism, as Clifford Geertz and Michel Foucault and others talked about. Whatever, you cannot lock yourself into one knowing system of the world, because there is no one knowing system of the world that works. But what is best, the best knowing system is science. And one reason it's the best is because it starts out knowing that it's wrong, knowing that it's only going to get better by recognizing its errors. But here we see the range of estimates for the spread of the virus. A lot of this depends on what people do, how much social distancing there is, what government regulations, but a lot of it just depends on the different models. What the different scientists think. They do not agree. We won't really know which of these models was best for months until the actual infection rates are known through massive antibody testing, and until the actual mortality rates are known through comparisons with the mortality rates of earlier years and averages and so on and so forth. We can be pretty sure the infection rates are much greater than we have been told officially, and the death rates we know are much greater. There's a lot of good journalistic and academic work has shown. But just to think a little bit more about science, these top 4 pictures are all electron microscope pictures of the COVID-19 virus. They don't look the same. Why don't they look the same? They're pictures, aren't they? Made by electrons. Because the whole process of making an electron photograph and actually making a normal photograph means you only capture certain things. A normal photograph does not capture a lot of radio waves, for example. An electron microscope does not capture the colors. These colors are added later, and the scientists decide which colors. And of course, the angle makes a difference. And maybe you choose a nice little round virus, and there's a fair number of round viruses in the other images, but they most of them, turns out, aren't even really round. But yet, one scientist thought, or a team of scientists thought, this is the best image of the virus. Now, of course, in the models, these are 3 different models. the scientists can, give in to their urge for symmetry and make every virus a nice, perfect little ball with its nice little hooky things. I forget what they're called. How the virus actually invades in the other cell. But notice how different they look, right? The one in the middle actually has the most accuracy in terms of the fatty layer. I think it's a styrofoam ball. But some of the other ones, they're all similar, but they're different. And where are these viruses existing? Is this someone's lungs or the air? Well, where do you get these great colors from? I mean, I love the colors, but they're sort of distracting, as in the pictures above. The point is that science is not perfect. Science is always making mistakes. Scientists are going to disagree. I also want to say there's nothing wrong with regular people looking at science and making arguments about it, because it's based on evidence. Now, if you're going to get deep into the weeds of statistical analysis of what the technical apparatus can actually deliver, then you might have to call on scientists. But the good news is, for most questions, at least in the beginning, there's a great deal of disagreement. And you can always find a scientist who agrees with your prejudices. Now, after a while, with important issues like evolution, which is no longer a theory but a fact, or global climate change and warming, which is no longer a theory but a fact, the vast majority of the scientists eventually come to some agreements around the basic parameters. Although many details of evolution, many details of climate change are not agreed upon. Don't be shy about criticizing what scientists do. I've disagreed with scientists, my whole life, really, and in many cases I was right. Of course, I study scientists. This is my main focus, so I'm very familiar with how the discourse works. But I just think average people should feel free to do the same. Here in California, we had two really interesting studies that came out. One was a study done by Stanford people looking at the level of antibodies found among people in the Mid-Peninsula. And the study came up with the claim that there was many more people had been exposed to the virus than most people thought. And so the study was critiqued, all sorts of people, scientists as well as statisticians and so on. Now, some of the findings turned out not to be as bad as originally thought. There does seem to be a level of immunity greater than 1% around the Mid-Peninsula. But basically, the study was trashed, and rightfully so, by regular people and scientists both. Two emergency room doctors in Bakersfield came out with an argument that this flu wasn't so bad. And their arguments were very easily demolished by scientists and non-scientists alike. So I want to urge people to not just try to turn this whole debate over to the scientists. Eventually, as the scientists agree more and more, and scientists reach a consensus, we must listen to that. Like the consensus of epidemiologists that social distancing works, and it's been proven. Like the arguments people have made after some back and forth that masks play a major role in stopping the spread of infection, right? But other questions of what this specific study means and so on and so forth, they should not just be left to the scientists. And decisions about how to balance death rates produced by economic collapse with death rates produced by the viruses, we have to take what the experts say seriously. There will be excess deaths caused by economic collapse. And there will be many, many deaths, and there have been already, deaths caused by the virus. Some kind of a balance has to be reached, because there will be deaths. That is guaranteed. But it's not just science that helps. Art can help. I'm very fond of all these different images of Trump as a virus. See, here we have virus as a virus idea spreading through the culture, trying to get people to understand the qualities that make Trump viral, and particularly like the Trump virus, pathological lying, paranoid ravings, xenophobic fever, chills towards democracy, divorce from reality. Well, you can see my point. We have seen an incredible proliferation of people using art, especially humor, which is a form of art in my opinion, to cope with and to try to navigate into a future, a better future through this pandemic. A lot of it's been done musically, like Chris Mann's parody of Adele's Hello, which I mentioned earlier, which everyone should watch if you want to understand what it feels in California to be trapped in your house. Right, and the guy can really sing. He doesn't usually do parodies. I only have a few more slides left if you're getting bored. The 11 people I see who are watching. So this is a quote from this book, Books Burned Badly, by the Spanish author, he's a Gallego, he's from Galicia, Manuel Rivas, talking about the burning of the books in La Coruña when the fascists took power. I notice as you look at this text that a lot of it is about how Francoism tried to repress memory in society so it could keep secret a lot of what it has done. And notice how the author is arguing that the fire continues to burn in Galicia, burning of the books. And books that have not yet been written are still to be burned, as long as this idea, this viral idea, that you can burn ideas out and destroy them in that way, as long as that is common. But to be a little more positive, here is a quote from the foreword to Male Fantasies. This is by the great socialist feminist writer, Barbara Ehrenreich. And she's talking about Theowit's brilliance and so on. And Theowit was a member of the new left in Germany. So even though he criticizes authoritarian communism, he supports social change. And he's very positive towards Rosa Luxemburg and the Spartacists and non-Leninist communists. So notice what Barbara Ehrenreich says about the dynamics of the Reds, as they call by the Nazis, and they're labeled in Theowit's book as well. The curiosity swims upstream and turns around, surprising itself. Desire can expand. Barriers between women and men, the high and the low, these crumble. This is what the fascists found horrifying, was the democratization on a very deep level, an attack even on patriarchy of society. It's a joyous commingling as disorderly as life. There's many groups now who are trying to mobilize this crisis so that out of it will come a better world. The Next System, in my little town in Santa Cruz, there's a dozen groups that work together and on their own, trying to think, what will we do next to make sure that this virus doesn't produce more authority, as the Chinese want, as the giant social media companies want, Chinese government wants, I should say, as the Trump government and his supporters want, but rather that this can produce progress in making a more egalitarian, sustainable, and just society. And if I was going to be playing music, I would play these three versions of Bella Ciao from Italy. Bella Ciao is a hymn of the partisans who fought fascism in Italy. It means beautiful goodbye. It's about the partisans saying goodbye to each other, knowing that some of them are going to die fighting the fascists, right? And yet, it's what they want to do. It's worth doing for the future of their society. And these three different videos, the middle one is from Germans playing in solidarity with their society. You have to understand, only left people sing the song and know what it means. But it's a song about both hope and the realization that we only have hope, we only have bravery when we are faced with something truly fearful. And only by overcoming that can we go to the next level and try to make a better society, in fact, for the future, whether we survive the present or not. So thank you very much, and I'm going to open my email and people send me a question or two, but I'm not sure how much more time we have. Thank you.
Hört man mich?
Bist du jetzt noch bei Linken?
Ja, eigentlich, wo ist er? Gibst du mir Zeichen, wenn man mich hört?
Ich hört man schon.
Okay. So thank you very much, Chris. It was a very interesting talk. Well, basically, we also would have been interested to know what you think, how governments use the virus and the restrictions that are given to society to get information from them and to control them better. Like we are on Zoom now. Like Zoom does not has no secure data transfer. They can get all our information and use this. Governments could get it. They could collect more and more information now in the times of Corona. Like here in Austria, there was also discussed a Corona app, where when you go somewhere and somebody's sick, people get the information about this. So the virus allows people, allows governments to get more and more control. So what do you think about that?
Well, it shouldn't be a surprise. Every crisis is used by different groups to try to maximize their goals. And for authoritarian governments, this is the direction they will go. They will try to use the virus to impose more and more control. Even in China, which already had an extraordinary level of social control, as Hans pointed out, and as I mentioned as well, through their various programs and their giant security apparatus, even they are trying to maximize this. And of course, in the United States, it's the same. But notice, too, it's not just the governments. In the United States, the social media companies have made a massive profit of this crisis. Zoom, which we're using now, has made an increase in their worth of 3 times, I think. Amazon has made billions of dollars through this crisis. Apple has not lost money. Microsoft, Google, Alphabet, they all are doing quite well. That's why this idea of surveillance capitalism is so important, because already those companies for profit have been trying to extract the behavioral surplus. So the thing to do is to try to resist this, not to be paranoid. I've been an activist for many, many years. I've been to jail many times. I've been surveilled by private security and by the government. You know, when you live in a small town, you are under surveillance. Your friends are always watching you. You know, just how truly dangerous and how accurate these more centralized and technocratic means of control are, it's debatable. But until we're past through this virus, we're only going to see an increase of attempts to track people. There are apps going to be going on phones in the United States. Google and Apple, Microsoft and Apple, and I think Google too, are cooperating to make an app so that they can broadcast your location everywhere. And so, especially if you're tagged as infectious, they can track you down. Well, in China, they already have this. This might be why the Chinese response to the pandemic was so effective. But in Korea, which is a capitalist, more open society, they too have implemented very close control of people. And if you're found to be infected, you have to get that app on your phone so the authorities can follow where you go. But on the other hand, this is what happens in pandemics. There's long-standing laws in both democracies and authoritarian governments going back thousands of years during, the idea of the quarantine, that when people are sick, you have a right to put them on a leper's island, to put them aside for 14 days. They come off a plague ship. If you're infectious but not sick, like a famous case in the United States from the 1800s, Typhoid Mary, you can be locked up because your freedom ends when you are infecting other people. This is the paradox of freedom. And it's a very hard thing for someone like myself, who's an anarchist, who has freedom as one of their highest values. But like many other anarchists and feminists in the United States, we want to listen to science, to the scientists. And if the scientists say we should restrict our movements and our interactions with people, we believe them. We don't believe what the government says. We believe what the scientists say.
But you also know science is not always right. I mean,
well, no,
I'm sure in this case it is. But it's only...
Well, that's what I said earlier. You have to look at what all the scientists are saying and make a balanced judgment. So, I mean, I've stressed in my presentation, science is not always right. They're very confused about some things, but the general outlines are clear. I went into lockdown even before my city did, and we were one of the earliest parts of America to go into lockdown. California went into lockdown way sooner because one of my friends is an epidemiologist, and he said everyone should lock down right away, or this will kill millions of people. And I believed him, and actually, everything he said has so far come to pass. But yes, we can't just trust scientists, and we can't only trust scientists when they speak through the government. And then when the scientists don't have a consensus, like around nuclear power, or whether nuclear weapons make sense, well, then you have to resist science. I've gone to jail many times resisting science. I've protested against the way labs that do biological research were organized in the 1970s. I argued that with many other people, including scientists, that the ideas, the way people were approaching genetic engineering was very dangerous. And in fact, our protest led decided.
This is here. Okay. You're still here?
I'm still here. Can you hear me? I hear your phone going off, though.
Yeah,
Is that your phone?
it's done now. You can continue.
Well, I've spoken up, but it was a very good question. But that's one of the things we face. But I will say something else. I think we can't just focus on the dangers that this pandemic opens up of Chinese, of authoritarian governments, and of the big capitalist social media companies. We should also focus on the opportunities, the growth of social solidarity, the building of communities, the creation of networks that will respond to crises on their own. Many of the masks people wear in the United States and in the rest of the world were made by regular people. People donated their own masks, construction workers to the hospitals. People come out in the streets to cheer their neighbors who are going to risk their lives, to go to the hospitals and work, or go to make food or harvest food. As in my part of the country, it's very much an agricultural part of California. And those people are risking their lives to grow the food people need to eat. So we can make something positive out of this crisis. Just as the crises of the 60s, led to both positive and negative things, every act of protest was met by the government's claim that more repression was necessary. But many people argue, no, we don't need more repression. We can respond differently to the needs of society. Now we don't just have the problem of the pandemic. We need to find ways to respond to the pandemic that make society stronger, that makes the average person stronger, that makes authority weaker, and use that to respond to climate change. Use that to respond to the growing inequality of wealth, which since 1977 around the world, the rich have gotten massively richer and more people have gotten poorer. So all these things, these crises are not going to stop. We are in the middle of a cycle of perpetual crises, wars on terror, pandemic, collapses of empire. We saw the Soviet empire collapse just 31 years ago. The American empire is in profound decline. China seems ascendant, but China is incredibly unstable. Russia will never return to its imperial status. Saudi Arabia, which in a way is the Saudi tribe's little empire in the Arabian Peninsula, actually many different tribes live there, it's also equally unstable. So in these intensely dangerous and unstable times, as we see through this pandemic, we need to find a lot of different ways to respond.
Well, you're right. I think our task now is to focus on the future, but also see the dangers and try to find new ways of resistance, maybe. Also, we are, because communication there is much more communication via internet now than has ever been before. More communication over borders between people living in different political systems. So I think this has also some potential. People are much more into the net now. But
yes.
There are also from the same source lots of dangers. And I think this should be a future discussion because now it's very late here and
yes,
I think we stop for now and continue another time.
Yeah, that would be a great idea. But I just want to say that this project of every year commemorating and applying the lessons of the past, of the Nazi book burning and people burning of the past to the present, is a really important work of art. And I'm very honored and happy to participate in it. And it's one of the new ways of having resistance. So thank you, Hans. And
Thank you.
Okay, so bye-bye for this night.
Goodbye. See you next time.
See you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Jetzt trittst du Christoph auf.
Sind wir noch online?
Sind wir noch online? Ja. Na, du bist auch drin, Christoph.